Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the modern market, where every day we discuss everything to do with the modern market, that is the crypto market, the NFT market, and how to make some and or a lot of money on the internet. Loaded up for discussion today, we have Ton falls out of the top 10 coins after charges against CEO have been revealed. Number two, BlackRock added 4,000 shares of its spot Bitcoin ETF to its strategic global bond fund. And finally, DeFi Titan Aave proposes an integration with BlackRock's fund as well. So that is the main headlines for today. But we've also got the latest on price action on crypto and NFTs as usual, plus some discussion on Vitalik's hate and takes on DeFi. Some may describe them as hateful takes. Stay tuned for that today. Legendary is in the co-host seat, and we're ready to get into it. But before we do, just a reminder, friends, nothing that we say here is financial advice. This market is incredibly risky. We don't know anything for sure, unfortunately. So please do proceed with caution and exercise your own judgment. With that out of the way, Legendary, it is Tuesday. It is the 27th of August. We are going to be meeting up in London in just a little bit. I'm looking forward to it. How are you doing?
Jim, excited for that. Not only excited for the show, but it's been a while since we've been able to catch up in person. There is a difference between the daily pre and post show calls as opposed to like seeing one another in person. So we have quite a few things on the agenda to discuss. And I think we also carved out, it's something we've been speaking about a while, like carved out some time to speak about like personal stuff. Something we basically on founder level almost never get to do because it's always business, business, business. Like we do have an idea what's going on in each other's life, but like we often just don't find, the time to talk about that in more detail. So I'm also looking quite forward to that.
Yeah, pretty hilarious. Like every now and again, we just drop an absolute personal bombshell on each other that it's just like,
Mhm.
what? How is that even possible that that thing happened and that we haven't mentioned it to each other in like 2 weeks or something? But
Yeah,
it's just the nature of our conversation. Any personal bombshells today, Legendary?
maybe the extension of the last story I've been telling you.
I I don't know. I mean, I'm glad that we can laugh about it. I think that's the only way to do it when you're just like hyper busy and trying to build something together, and really, really focused on something. But at the same time, it is kind of ridiculous that some like super serious stuff can go on every now and again. And we just, because of, I don't know, people have moved towards this asynchronous way of working. And I think people kind of like that. And it's obviously the way people want to go, which means you have less touch points, right? Although people will see us in the show, and yes, we have a quick chat before the show, and we have a bit of a chat after as well. There's like things to talk about, and we try to minimize that because we don't want to, we don't want to talk forever about things we don't need to because we've all got stuff to do. So it's like it's this interesting thing where the shift to asynchronous working has meant that you very yeah, like the personal and the work stuff is very difficult to find the time for.
Yeah, and as you say, it's also happening in an asynchronous way. Like I remember the one time I was sharing a story about my family. And you're like, "Oh, when did this happen?" I was like, "Oh, 3 weeks ago." And you're like, "What?"
Yeah,
That's exactly the result of that.
yeah, exactly. It's kind of challenging. I wonder whether in the end, I have this sneaky suspicion that people will move back towards a more synchronous workflow. Like at some point in time, I think when you're working in a team together, I think people will realize that there's things that just fall through the cracks and don't get done or don't get discussed, or whether that's actually professional stuff or personal stuff that might actually be helpful to have those conversations. I have a feeling that that will be something that people will move towards at some point in time. Legendary, what do you think? Do you think kind of more IRL synchronous stuff will make a comeback?
I don't think so. I mean, know that like certain companies like X and others have been pushing for their people to come back into the office and do that, but I don't think that this will be a sustainable movement. Like I don't know, probably in the future we'll get old enough to experience a time where you have an AI chip, I have an AI chip, and in the morning it's all updated with everything that's been going on in your life, and there's absolutely no need to talk about that because we're already briefed on the neuronal level, which would be amazing.
You can just get your download from someone.
From my AI toothbrush.
Yeah, exactly. Like while you're brushing your teeth, your AI toothbrush will explain to you the important updates from the people close to you, so you don't even need to talk to them.
That would be wonderful. I know.
That is the future we are aiming towards. Um, and free feedback for your toothbrush manufacturers out there. Look, as always, we're going to get into the crypto markets, the NFT market, and more. Let's start with the price action. Uh, Starting with the majors, we have Bitcoin down a couple of percent at 62.3K. We've got ETH down 4%. Why is it always underperforming, for God's sake? Down 4% to 2.6K. Solana is actually down a little bit more in the past 24 hours, down 4.5% to $153. Getting into the headlines themselves, first big one, I think, is that TON drops as low as $5.1 before recovering to 5.4. It falls out of the top 10 coins by market cap after the charges against its CEO were revealed. We'll go into that in a bit more detail in a bit. That was clearly the biggest news coming out yesterday. We did a big show on it, and we'll kind of tease out some of the information as well today. As always, we say we talk about the market, the crypto market, the NFT market, but when things like this happen, it's pretty important for online communication and how we operate online. So I think that's really, really relevant to all of us. Next, BlackRock added 4,000 shares of its spot Bitcoin ETF to its strategic global bond fund. They seem to be adding quite relentlessly, to be honest. So that's important to note. And then finally, DeFi Titan Aave proposes integration with BlackRock's Biddle to fortify its GHO stablecoin. Aave Labs proposes to build a new instance of GSM that supports external integrations and related control mechanisms, specifically supporting BlackRock's BUIDL. With this implementation, it can be more capital efficient while maintaining the high standards of backing as USDC is backing its stablecoin. So we're going to try and tease out the details there for you, why we think that's significant, as well as getting into the big opinions that Vitalik has been sharing on ETH, which has been causing a big stir. So we'll be discussing that as well. Some notable sales from around the space. There were a bunch of higher CryptoPunk sales in the last 24 hours. We had a CryptoPunk Cowboy selling for 45.99 ETH, but there was multiple others selling well above floor, which is always a good sign. Helen Nasarin, a fantastic artist, sold this piece that I'm showing on screen, 12 ETH, Forget Me Not. This was bought by Seed Phrase, big collector. And finally, Pudgy Penguin Wizard sold for 16.69 ETH. Good strength in the Penguin community too. That is the price action, and those are the headlines. Legendary, let's head over to our NFT marketplace partner, Mintify, and see what you've got for us over there.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's do it. NFT is actually holding up pretty well. It's a flat day through and through. We have Bored Apes down 0.46% at a 13.8 ETH floor. Pudgy's down a bit more, down 2% to a 10.6 ETH floor. Mutants are basically unchanged from yesterday at 2.2 ETH. Milady's same as yesterday, 3.8 ETH. Little Pudgies actually have seen a bit of a pump, up 4% to 0.92 ETH. And Azuki's up a bit from yesterday, up 1.5% to 4.81 ETH floor. In terms of the big movers over the last 24 hours, it's a collection we haven't touched on in a while. It's the Kodas from Other Side. They are up 21% over the last 24 hours and actually up 52% to a 1.18 ETH floor over the last 7 days. The pump yesterday happened on, I would say, quite a fair bit of volume for what we consider fair volume these days, with 32 ETH in volume that went into the collection.
Interesting. Do we know what's going on in the Other Side ecosystem at the moment? I know they did that VIP poker tournament the other day. Any other reason why this particular asset would be kind of moving a bit more?
Honestly, I don't know. I have stopped tracking what's going on with them. I don't know if they have another event, play test, or anything coming up like that. But it has been a sustainable trend over the last 7 days, and it's been also interesting to pick up that some of the sales have happened way above floor, some at around the 2 ETH mark. but nothing too outstanding in terms of a 50, 100 ETH or whatever sale. But it does seem that there's been some organic pickup of some above floor quotas.
Yeah, I think that's pretty fair. One of the things I was thinking, or maybe a question for you, Legendary, before I kind of share my thoughts. When you think of the various assets available at the moment, you've obviously got NFTs as a standalone asset and meme coins as well. I know you've kind of edged away from both of them in some respect, but you're definitely more on the NFT side. Are you thinking like this revival is one which can be sustained? Like, is this a sustained revival now? Have NFTs like truly bottomed in that respect?
I think if you look at the key moment in time, um, and the end of Blur, what was it, season 3,
That
when
was
that
so crucial, right? If you think about it now.
incentive mechanism fell away, I feel like that we've been able to sustain more pumps. And if you look at CryptoPunks, Pudgies, and all the collections, which are up since that point in time, they didn't give too much back to the market. Like, I remember when we talked last week about the Pudgy rods, for example, right? And I said you checked in on them on Monday and checked in on them end of the week. They have this, I don't know, 30% pump and managed to sustain most of that. So even though the Pudgies did, give back some of the pump that they had, they're still at a 10.6 E4 and not exactly back to where they were before the pump, which is a scenario that would have happened more likely with Blur incentives, because you just would have farmers cash out, take profits, cut losses, whatever. So it could be more sustainable. I do think that we'll always give a bit back to the market in terms of the momentum, but it feels like now we're like actually going up steps in terms of being on a roller coaster that goes up and down and ends up exactly where it started.
Okay, I think that's fair. What else was I going to say on that? Um, Maybe the main thing I was going to say, I was actually going to take it to this article that I wrote. When was this? August the 2nd. Okay, so almost a month ago, I wrote this article in my newsletter where I was thinking about NFTs versus meme coins. I think you brought up the really, really important point, which is the end of Blur incentives, which you know how this space works, right? Like something important happens, it becomes a big deal, and then 2 weeks after, people almost forget that it ever even existed. But it's so important to remember that whilst I think there was actually a legitimate amount of argument about whether it was having an effect on the price, it seems fairly obvious now that it was having a pretty negative downward pressure on the price, because you continuously had these people buying, these incentivized buyers who had absolutely no intention of holding. So I think that's a really good point, and that actually adds to this separate point that I was going to make on why I think NFTs are probably, or what we already saw was probably the bottom. Doesn't necessarily mean they go up parabolic in the way that they did in 2021, but in terms of finding the bottom, I think the sellers are running out. And this is actually the way I think about it quite a lot. I think about how many sellers there are relative to other things. So I shared this article. I'm showing it on screen for people who are watching in. Remember, we're live on X video and YouTube video as well. It's called the new meme coin thesis. I wrote this on at the start of the month, at the top of August. Been thinking a lot on meme coins versus NFTs. Number one, NFTs definitely experienced a mania in 2021, but in the process, a legitimate asset class emerged, which is still, all things considered, pretty healthy today. It doesn't really matter how far anyone is down versus 2021. The fact that these collections hold multi-million dollar market caps now, even in the bear market, they did too, shows that they are legit asset class. Simultaneously, there was a lot of vaporous nonsense launched in 2021 with many hyperbolic claims of what they could achieve at that moment in time. I think meme coins is tracking this pretty well. You have more vaporous nonsense than ever. People on the timeline talking about meme majors versus mid caps versus more risky lower cap plays with a confidence, and when actually they are all high risk, and people assuming the next leg up to millions or billions of market cap on multiple coins, and VCs getting involved to establish the asset class. And yet I do think there will be a new asset class for meme coins in the exact same way as there was for NFTs. It's just many of these at the moment will be worth nothing, and lots of people will get wrecked. Um, this was my point about the risk. Whilst many consider meme coins more risky than NFTs, I don't think that's because of meme coins, but more because of individual behavior. The uncapped upside potential of meme coins has made people unhappy with just a 2x or 3x as everyone is gunning for the moonshot. I think it was psychologically easier to sell two of three NFTs you just minted to recover your costs and then hold one for the moonshot versus selling 1.69 billion of random meme coin and leave 39.7 billion for the moonshot. Also, you could just list a couple of NFTs before going to bed and hopefully they sold in the morning. This would get you to try to sell. And so the thing that I thought when thinking about all this stuff is that there's just far fewer people who are, there are far fewer sellers left when it comes to NFTs because of the structure, because of the shape of the market. Now, most buyers and sellers or aggressive traders have moved to meme coins. The people who wanted to sell were most likely out of NFTs. Legendary, how do you perceive the kind of argument I just made on top of the thing about blur incentives that you just described? You're on mute. You're on mute.
It's a very good argument. I like the psychological side of it. The fact that it's easier to, as you said, sell one of the two of the three, however many NFTs you minted. And I do think we're like definitely gunning for higher multiples in short amounts of time. Like when you were reading through that, a post came in mind by Orangey. I'm going to share it on screen. Orangey is saying, took a screenshot at 100 Sol PNL, walked away from my PC, came back 5 minutes later, down 75 Sol. So it's basically exactly summarizing what you've been talking about in this article. It's not only that we're going for these higher multiples, but also the time frame has been getting shorter and shorter. Like I remember very, very well when I bought my first apes, 5 to 7 ETH, and I was like, it took them 46 days or something from there to hit 60 ETH. So I did 10x on them in 1.5 months, and I thought that's crazy. And if you would, share this as a meme story, oh, I did a 10x in 1.5 months, people are like, okay, so what? Why do I give a fuck about this? Because the token I looked at did 1,000,000% while I was asleep and already crashed to zero. So it's definitely that the attention span is getting shorter. That's just a fact that you have to consider when you're trading these assets. But I also think that this again then changes, and that maybe goes back to this like generational thing that we've been speaking about, Gen Z and millennials, right? That I just don't have the short attention span to trade meme coins. I feel more comfortable in Polymarket. I feel more comfortable with NFTs. And I can imagine that I'm not the only person feeling like that. Plus, you might also have some kind of like emotional attachment from how NFTs were traded last cycle by the people who are still there. So all of these factors coming together might mean that there's not that many people left who just happy to dump the NFTs and move on to the next thing.
Interesting. Yeah, I take your points there. There definitely seems to be, there just seems to be a lot of strength in the NFT market, to be honest. And frankly, it's great to see. I was speaking to someone the other day, and we were just talking about almost with sadness of how the NFT market got hit so hard and how people left. Because the cool thing about NFTs, and I know lots of people are huge NFT enthusiasts here and they kind of know this already, and maybe it's obvious, but the really, really cool thing that I experienced on a human level is that it just brought people in who, look, I appreciate lots of them were speculators. Like, I'm not taking that part of it out, but legitimately, it did bring to the table like a bunch of people who are not the type of financial speculators who were, who are going to be day trading with the charts open all the time. I think it brought people in with this idea of like creative or owning your product, going direct to market, maybe even with the hope of royalties existing, like trying to create a new creator model that would be sustainable, being able to cut out some of the people who had traditionally had power over creators. Like, I just think there was something quite inspirational about some of the people who came in with that view. And look, not all of it's working out precisely as planned, but I do think that there's something lost when NFTs suffer, because there was this creative inspiration with them, even if there was also, in addition to that, a huge kind of hyper speculative bubble as well. Look, Legendary.
I think just based on what you said, that's like such a healthy evolution. If you think about how the NFT market looked at its peak, and you were doing the same thing that you were doing with meme coins, right? We were staying up late. There was a mint coming up. We had no idea what the mint was. It also didn't really matter. The only question was relevant is, will it mint out, and will I get some, and will I be able to dump it on someone else before it goes to zero? And the NFT asset class like turned more and more speculative and actually became what meme coins are today, with the difference still being that you had this like finite number of 10K, 5K, whatever, plus you had an image with it, which was like just unnecessary work, right? And then you remove that, you had the meme coin cycle that we're in right now. But now, because those asset classes are like completely separate, you have NFTs on the one hand, you have the memes on the other hand. I feel like that the focus on like actual work and cool products that are being built with NFTs can now like prosper in a more healthy way, because you won't launch an NFT project these days if you want to do like a low effort rug to make
Yeah,
money. You
not
would
really
rather
possible
try
to
to
do
get
it.
attention with a meme coin, and I feel like that makes NFTs more like protected in a way, and it's actually helpful for the like both reputation and longevity.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. You probably can't launch that kind of NFT project anymore. Um, we want to get into the Telegram CEO news. We also want to get into this kind of deep conversation on Vitalik's comment about DeFi, which has, I think, rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. So we're going to get into that in just a little bit. But Funky, why don't you close this topic for us? I know you've got your hand raised. Welcome to the stage, my friend. Final take on this issue.
GM, everyone. Yeah, I just wanted to piggyback on something that you were saying, B-Check, as a former educator of 20 years. The thing that really attracted me to NFTs very early on in 21 was this premise of the new creator model. I can't tell you how many incredibly talented artistic kids that I met over my 2 decades in the classroom, and they're constantly being told, just the typical American extolling all the virtues of, oh, go to college, go get the job that you're going to do. And these people end up giving up on their dreams, right? Because they just feel like there's no way for me to be a creator and actually have a living. And so I probably degened into too many NFTs because I like the art, because I like the people who were behind it, and I was trying to support them as artists. Obviously, probably not the right thing to do with my funds, but there was something that really just spoke to my heart, and I was very encouraged that there was, and now this has morphed into people like you and Legendary, right? Like there's a different kind of content creation that can be done, that can be self-sustaining, and allow people to have a business and thrive and so on and so forth. So I'm happy that it's taken all these different directions, but that was really my big impetus to want to get involved with NFTs, was to support artists, just as someone who really felt that creatives by and large are ignored in our Western society, particularly here in the US. And so I was happy to see them kind of come to the fore and get some long overdue recognition.
I like it. We are obviously very pro creator, looking out for ways to stay pro creator. To be honest, we're always interested in that. Always interested in this discussion in particular. Look, we've got a lot of important stuff to move into before we get into the Telegram stuff, which I know people think is the most pressing issue for the day. We're going to dedicate a reasonable amount to that. Definitely wanted to bring this conversation about Vitalik's DeFi takes, because it's making people kind of upset, I think. I'm just going to share some of the conversation on screen if you're watching in, and then just share it for the people who are listening. In response to this tweet, Vitalik had this to say. The first tweet was this. I watched a recent episode, this recent podcast, and I have to admit, I had no idea that Vitalik disliked DeFi. It almost feels hard to believe, in a sense. The overwhelming majority of ETH's value comes from its use as collateral in DeFi. Why on earth would you want to see fewer DeFi protocols being built? I honestly hope it's not true. I'd feel a bit jaded, to be honest, since I see Vitalik praising USDC all the time which I find to be a very unimpressive use of crypto. He kind of goes on to explain like why he feels hurt. And I think a lot of ETH people feel like really, really hurt when I think two things are happening. One, there's like this explicit kind of lack of love for DeFi. And then I think the second thing, which is a bit more, how would you describe it? The second thing, which is a bit more dark, potentially, is people are kind of saying, well, you don't like the money making aspect, but there are people at the Ethereum Foundation who, whilst publicly saying they don't like the money making aspect of this particular asset, they are signing all these deals and advisory deals and token deals and these types of things, enriching themselves. That's like the additional accusation, I think, which is being leveled on occasion towards some of these ETH Foundation members. In response, he had this to say. I actually don't think, just to be clear, like I don't think he hates DeFi, which is what some people have tried to suggest. I think he just has a kind of bigger vision for it. And I think it's a good opportunity to kind of share what that is, because so many of us hold this coin. And I think a lot of people would want to know what the founder thinks, although maybe I've even got some comments on that in just a bit too. He says, the kinds of applications that I want to see are applications that, one, are useful in a sustainable way, and two, don't sacrifice on the principles of permissionlessness and decentralization. I think DEXs are great, and I use them every week. I think decentralized stablecoins are great. I think Polymarket is great. I think USDC is less great than a decentralized stablecoin, but as a practical matter, we simply have to respect that it's incredibly convenient and lots of people use it. It's incredibly useful for me personally when doing international donations, way more convenient than banking. What he does not respect is this: things whose attractiveness comes from some temporary source that has no sustainability. E.g., I felt no excitement towards the 2021 era liquidity farming craze because obvious that it came from token issuances that are fundamentally temporary. If people tell me you can get a good yield by parking your coins here, my question always is, where does the yield come from? Who are the people on the other side of the transaction who are paying the yield? In those cases where there is a specific answer to the question that there is a good reason to believe will remain true in 5 years, then I'm absolutely excited about it. I think this is the final important thing. I have to say this because it doesn't, the idea wouldn't be expressed fully without it. Then I want to hear your thoughts, Legendary. One other thing I would add is that we should all agree that finance is not enough. There are so many centralization points that are rapidly growing and threats in the world's technology today. He talks about political attacks on encrypted messaging, centralized identity systems, social media, censorship, surveillance, all these types of things. Even if you could magic finance into being exactly perfect, if we get these other issues wrong, the world would still really suck. And that is not to say finance is not important. He says finance is a critical part of any strategy for pushing against many of these trends. Legendary, definitely want to come to you here. My reading of this is that he's not as against it as people might think, but basically thinks we need to be focusing on much bigger things, much more important things, and the unsustainable aspects of the ETH financial ecosystem is what he is explicitly against. What are your thoughts? How are you seeing this?
Okay, so first of all, I have to say it's impressive that you managed to read through the whole thing, the initial criticism, where the person who wrote it misspelled Vitalik's name 5 or 6 times as vitamin, and you didn't trip over that a single time.
Do you know what? I thought that might just be one of his new nicknames. So maybe I should have just called him Vitamin.
Yeah,
Is that one of his nicknames? That should be his nickname if it isn't, right?
It should be his nickname now after that. Yeah, I think that person managed to call him Vitalik once, but the other time it was just vitamin. Anyhow, on the actual subject, I think Vitalik's response is very fair. And the liquidity farming example from 2021, I don't know like who in the audience remembers that, where you would go to Binance pools or to DeFi clones of Uniswap on ETH, and we used all kinds of fish, krill, shrimp, seafood names for them, and you would go there and you would just know if you are one of the first people in the pool for the first half hour, it's going to be like a 5,406,000 APY on that, and you would, make, I don't know, 5x on your money for an hour, and then it would go to zero, or it would pump in the meantime, and you would dump and move on. So that's obviously not sustainable. And then the argument of, the individual token deals that some people in the ETH Foundation have been taking. And there's been also, like we report in the story, there's been consequences to that. It's been made public. You can't make Vitalik responsible for that, because it's the same line of thought as saying that the Telegram CEO is responsible for terrorists using his platform to plan horrendous attacks. Like, just doesn't work that way. If Vitalik wouldn't say anything about that, would be like, yeah, sure, I want the ETH Foundation to take as many token deals as they can, and put as much money as they can to their own pockets, no matter how sustainable or unsustainable that is. That would paint a completely different picture, but that's not the case. And I think his point is a very, very fair one. And the thing that I like most is that it's much more than finance, because we are all so much focusing on the finance aspect. We are all so much focusing on the speculating, on our individual token deals, NFT trading, meme coin trading, whatever it is, that I feel like it's hard to not forget that there's a bigger picture. It's easy to forget that there's a bigger picture out there, which goes way beyond finance. And I feel like the Telegram case, which we will be talking about again soon, is a perfect example for that. I feel like countries that are unbanked and don't have access to that are a perfect example for that. Even the international transactions or donations that Vitalik mentioned are a massive evolution away from how those transactions would work in traditional banking. But obviously, a lot of people have come into the space with the mindset to change their lives from a financial perspective. So it's often a finance first focus, but it was never Vitalik's first focus. Like, he was never his idea, I'm going to do this and become a billionaire. He had a vision and ambition that goes way beyond
that. I take some of those points. Two interesting other points, which I think there's a variety of ways to go on this. I actually am a little bit critical on the way that they are speaking about it, because I think is a message. I think this is a messaging thing. Like, this is a communications thing. You need to speak well of what your community values highly, and whether or not you have a grand vision of something else down the line in the future. In order to get there, you need to keep the people happy who are currently participating the most in the ecosystem. And I think speaking of DeFi more highly, I think is maybe just important. Like, rather than criticizing the speculative elements first, speak highly of it first, criticize the speculative elements after, because I don't think his criticism is that bad, to be honest. I think people who jump to that kind of final conclusion are probably just reading it too quickly and not looking at it more deeply. The second two really interesting points that I read, both by DC Investor, who, full disclosure for him, I guess, is that he's like a huge ETH bull. But I just hadn't thought of this. On the one hand, I think one idea shared was that maybe they felt like they can't really speak about the financial aspect as much because of this whole conversation that's been going on about whether or not ETH is a security for years and years and years. Maybe they don't want to come out and talk about how fantastic it is at replacing, or how fantastic it is as a store of value, and how great it is as money, when they've had all of these issues in the regulatory landscape in the US for so long. So that's more like a question, a factor, which I hadn't really considered, which I'm very open to thinking about. But the second, maybe more important thing for me is this point where he said, in the past few years, crypto has become over-indexed on people and what they think about things, rather than tech capability, decentralization, and censorship resistance. Time to purge this and get back to basics. Stop looking for approval and blessings. Just build something. And I was thinking about this a bit more. I was thinking, like, it's kind of like people getting upset with the founder of the internet if he thinks that the internet should be used for X, Y, or Z, and instead Apple build the iPhone. And he's like, oh, I didn't really envisage that. Like, that's not the thing that I was thinking that would be used here. It's like, well, no one cares what the founder of the internet thinks about the products that are now built on the internet. It's a technology which people have the complete freedom to build on top of and just do something useful. And when I thought about it through that framework, I was like, God, that's so correct to me. I think I've been thinking this for like 8 hours, so I don't know for sure. But like the idea that we have to constantly check with Vitalik what he thinks. And the thing is, I don't actually, his position on decentralization, he puts that up as one of the highest things. I don't actually even think that he would want people to check with him, but everyone still does keep checking with him. What do you think about this? What do you think about that? What do you, and I like, just build something good. If you think that something's good, just build it and make the future that you kind of want to see, rather than caring so much about what the founder of the decentralized permissionless tech wants. Would love to hear your thoughts on that, Legendary, because that's something I kind of came to a strong conclusion on last few hours.
I very much like the point of, not having to go for Vitalik's approval and just use the tech and build, and that can, shape the company, can shape and change the ecosystem. It's basically what we've been seeing with NVIDIA, which, NVIDIA used to be a company that only people in the gaming sector really knew because of the very high performing graphic cards for video games, etc. And now the whole run that they see is because of AI, because it just has been used for something that was never their core business. The only thing that I would take the counter position on is the very first point that you made, that in order to fulfill this grand vision, you need to make your community happy. That's the one I would probably disagree the strongest with. Thinking about Apple, you mentioned the iPhone. Remember the time when iPhone went out there and cut away the headphone jack? It was like, nope, there's not going to be a headphone jack anymore. And for years, reviews, tech reviewers, YouTubers were like, oh, this is actually a great phone, but minus point in the total verdict, it doesn't have a headphone jack. It doesn't have a headphone jack. Now, show me one phone that comes with a headphone jack. There's still some out there, but it's definitely a rather exotic feature. And AirPods revenue is up to 12 billion US dollars per year, which makes it a more profitable company. I'm sure that like almost everyone has seen this chart, then Shopify, Spotify, etc., etc. And that was certainly a decision that pissed off everyone and made everyone unhappy. And I do think that sometimes if you want to push for a change, you can't make everyone happy in the first place. You just have to do it. And to make a good case why people would rather prefer to have the AirPods that don't have a cable, or to have something that you want to change but had to face like huge initial resistance against that, because people tend to become complacent and just be happy with the status quo and not really happy with change. And if you make people happy, then you often can hinder change. That's the only thing I would push back on.
Do you know what? I don't mind that. I'm quite pro. It might be a slightly different context, but I'm quite pro founders taking like difficult decisions and just doing whatever the hell they want, even if they need to go through like a difficult period in order to get there. We've got a couple more points. As we said, we're going to get to the Telegram news in just a bit and break that down for you, the kind of charges that have been revealed in a bit more detail. We've got a couple of hands raised. Let's close this conversation off, because I think it was a really important conversation about ETH and its very nature in the last few days. Let's go to Sensei first, and then Funky's hands raised too. Sensei, welcome back with us again, 2 days in a row. How are you doing? What are your thoughts, sir?
GM, I hope you can hear me fine. This is indeed a very important conversation. I enjoyed following it. And awesome point all around. I agree with all of you. I just want to express my point that I don't think Vitalik honestly succeeded in clarifying his stance, which I do think is like something beyond like ETH being there for financial applications. But I don't think anyone sort of mentioning Polymarket, which has honestly become kind of a gambling outlet at this point, which he somewhat highlights as like this worthy use of Ethereum. And then he comes for lending and borrowing on ETH as like this Ouroboros that's like, oh no, people who use money are the ones borrowing money. So while I'm really glad he's there trying to clarify his stance and engaging in these conversations, which I think in itself is super bullish. I kind of look at this and I'm like, oh no, dude, like, I don't think you've done a good job clarifying yourself at all.
Yeah.
So while like I think we've correctly inferred his overall stance, I don't think he's done a good job delivering it to us. And that's all I wanted to contribute.
Sensei, can I ask from your perspective? And again, this is just people's opinions on like how they're reading the situation at the moment, because I'm just interested. I feel like I've noticed this sentiment, maybe it's even within myself, frankly, where it's just like, it's kind of, even if they say they like DeFi, but they're kind of also saying they don't like the speculative elements at the same time. Is there something that's emerging where the more Ethereum Foundation members who are kind of cut into these other deals and kind of enriching themselves separately? And to be clear, like, I think they should be made rich, right? Like if they're working on this amazing piece of tech, like they should be definitely appropriately compensated, both within the foundation and frankly for any other deals they do. But is there that type of thing emerging where it's like, look, you're getting rich on all this other stuff, why are you saying that other people can't get rich? Or is that unfair?
I mean, I think Ethereum Foundation as a unit opposing DeFi is kind of comical. I don't know. I don't think they should be taking stances. Vitalik personally can't be airing any opinions. I don't think foundation as a foundation. I don't know. It's a complicated question. I guess they're the one issuing grants, so they have to take some position. But I mean, definitely funding vaporware that is like not yielding anything beyond vaporware gains. I guess that's something we can all agree is not productive. But taking a hardline stance against DeFi, it would be surprising for me if they push that line of thinking forward.
Yeah,
Crypto is fundamentally a financial asset ultimately.
Yeah, fair enough. I think, to be clear, I think what he is saying is that DeFi is fine. Like the proper amounts of DeFi, when people are actually transacting with each other and borrowing, lending, like I think that's really cool. And I think that is what they are saying is pretty cool too. But interesting perspective as well. Funky, put a bow on this topic for us because we want to get onto the Telegram stuff and the Web3 Roundup to get people up to speed on everything else.
Yeah, just a real quick comment. I think you guys did a fantastic job navigating the conversation and brought up some incredible points. My big thing I would just argue is that if Vitalik is so interested in decentralization, then the foundation should do something to actually enhance decentralization of the Ethereum network, because it is terrible. Anybody knows this. Roughly 70% of the Ethereum nodes that are running validators are all done on hyperscalers like AWS, Microsoft Azure. So they really need to do something about that, because at the end of the day, that is a centralized choke point for the entire mainnet. And it's something that no one really ever wants to talk about. But that was just what I want to chime in.
Interesting. Very good point. I think that's very fair. Look, it's something we'll continue to talk about. ETH is has been an incredible tech innovation up to this point, and so we'll be following it closely. We hold a lot of it. Not gonna lie, been thinking whether I should or not, as some of this kind of, well, some of its price performance has been a bit challenging recently, but also some of these discussions, to be honest, when you're trying to figure out like, well, what's the next set of steps versus these other coins. But I think the reality is, this is maybe a conversation for another day, is that it's not obvious how the other chains trajectories are all that much better. It's an interesting conversation to have. We've kind of touched on it before, how Bitcoin is now starting to try to build more stuff on it as well, but then they're just like multiple years behind ETH in terms of building. So look, I think that's a discussion for another day. We'll come back to it. Let's get to the Web3 Roundup to get you up to speed with everything else that's been happening in the space in the past 24 hours. And then we're going to hit that Telegram news to just get you up to speed with what's going on over there. So from the snapshot, which is here, here we go. Number one, SEC and Abra settled charges for failing to register the offers and sales of its retail crypto product. Number two, Aave becomes the first lending protocol to surpass $100 million TVL on Base. Talking about the importance of lending and stuff, Aave is one of the best. Open Eden Labs surpasses $100 million of TVL for tokenized US treasuries. I think we reported on them the other day. I think that's pretty cool. Blast L2 announces instant bridging withdrawal up to 950 ETH, 600k USDB. I think that was a very much awaited, long-awaited update. Herman's not yet sold out. New NFT collection did not sell out in the end yesterday, or has not yet, after selling 3.6k out of 5k in a public sale targeting a 7,500 SOL raise. 12 fresh wallets whose first transactions have been 60 to 300 ETH deposit from Binance before Pudgy Penguin buys. That was a bit of interesting investigation from Cyrus into some Pudgy Penguin buy activity. And then finally, Elon Musk and Vitalik support California's AI safety bill, which I think Elon tweeted that might make a lot of people unhappy. But in general, I think the sentiment is that they like that the bill is introducing a critical harm category and explicitly separating between that and other bad things. And the charitable read of the bill is that the medium-term goal is to mandate safety testing. So this is kind of in line with the conversation we've been having recently about online harms and what kind of bad things, like how do we define these bad things and how do we keep people safe in this increasingly online world. But this is what a bill that's been proposed by California as it relates to AI. So it's a slightly different angle. That's the Web3 Roundup to get you up to speed with everything else that's happened in the space. We wanted to get to the Telegram news to just kind of update you with what's going on there. In principle, the charges were finally released. Remember, we spoke yesterday that the CEO was arrested in France, and lots of people were outraged because it appeared that it was some type of affront to freedom of expression, because he obviously runs an app with 900 million people on it, and there are lots of people constantly in communication with each other. And the argument was maybe there's something to do with moderation. Not enough moderation is taking place on Telegram. But the charges were released. Here's a few of them. Just going to take you through some of them. Number one, complicity. The administration of an online platform to allow an illegal transaction. And number two, refusal to communicate at the request of the authorized authorities the information or documents necessary for the realization and exploitation of interceptions authorized by the law. Also, complicity, detention of the image of a minor, of a child, pornographic nature. Complicity, dissemination, offer, or making available in an organized tape of images of a minor or of a pornographic nature. Also, the acquisition, transport, holding, offer, or disposal of narcotic products. Complicity, offer, assignment of making available without legitimate reason of equipment and instrument, a program or data designed to adapted for the attack and access to the operation. That was just a mouthful. I don't even know what that one's talking about. Complicity, organized gang, scam, association of criminals with a view to committing a crime or offense. So a lot of complicity here, which is, I think, obviously that person themselves are not being accused of doing some of those things. It means that they're complicit in other people doing those things. So that's what happened there. The ton price, as I'm showing on the screen, kind of reacted quite badly to this additional news. If you look at the 7-day chart, it was up as high as maybe $6.7, dumped to around 5.7 after, kind of recovered to almost 6, and then sold off again to just 5.1, kind of recovered to 5.5. But I guess the bigger question here, Legendary, is what's going on? What's our reaction to this? The price action has obviously been bad on the token, but is there anything bigger that we're able to comment here?
I think it has the potential to become a interesting political playing field or playing ball. Yesterday we talked about Russia requesting consulary access to Durov. The UAE did the same. He's also an Emirati citizen. Apparently, he also has citizenship still in Russia and in St. Kitts and Nevis, so in the island state where you can just buy your citizenship as well. And if you look at the relationship between the UAE and France, they're very strong allies, military speaking. When it comes to that, France is maintaining a naval base in Abu Dhabi. Emirati forces, on the other hand, are using French manufactured military equipment, including both tanks and fighter jets. So I think cases like this are diplomatically very interesting to watch and follow, because there's so many interests at play at the same time, right? There's Russia, which we touched on a bit yesterday. There's this relationship, especially under the light of the currently escalating conflict in the Middle East between France and the UAE, and everyone is like trying to get access to Durov. And there's been a Wired article from a couple of years ago that allegedly said that he allegedly did strike a deal with Putin to give Putin some access to Telegram data, which he's obviously denying. So you have these layers of political interest, military interest. Then you also have the fact that he has so many citizenships. Then I definitely bet that countries hope to kind of be in a good standing or have a favor with him, to then might be able to have a power play where they can get him in a position that these countries get some of the access to the data on Telegram. And on top of that, you have the diplomatic efforts that are happening and the media coverage of that. But I do think that, because yesterday we spent so much time, discussing impacts on society, freedom of speech. If you abstract all the way, because we talked about that yesterday, even from this perspective, this like silo that I've been just describing, it has the potential to, lead to a very, very interesting diplomatic political situation where a lot of countries are involved and have to move in a very, very careful way.
Hmm.
And he's at the center of this, obviously.
Yeah, good point on, like, look, for the people who maybe are just joining us today, I know we've got a lot of people in here today. Like, we kind of discussed the broad implications for freedom of speech and why freedom of speech is obviously quite important to uphold. We did that whole conversation yesterday. So we're trying to just provide some additional context and information today, especially given that we've only got a couple minutes left on the show. But like, one interesting other thing that I noticed, you're kind of talking about this political intrigue, governmental intrigue. Russia, this was an article from July the 30th, but it seems to be going live more recent. There seems to be doing some tests. It was reported in the last 24 hours. This article from Reuters said Russia to allow crypto payments in international trade to counter sanctions. So this was on the 30th of July. Russian lawmakers passed a bill on Tuesday that will allow businesses to use cryptocurrencies in international trade as part of efforts to skirt Western sanctions imposed after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The law is expected to go into force in September. And then, so obviously we're almost in September now, and this was written 10 hours ago on bitcoin.com news. It said Russia set to launch crypto payment trials next week. Russia is reportedly set to start the trials for cryptocurrency exchanges and digital token payments starting on September the 1st to mitigate payment difficulties caused by international sanctions. So there's a lot going on here. I know that's kind of going away from the main core story today, but we kind of dealt with the story in bigger detail yesterday, and we've kind of updated you with where that's going. There seems to be some other crypto related stuff at hand. And then the other thing that was happening as part of our conversation yesterday is like this EU versus US narrative is kind of emerging, where it's like, why are you guys trying to enforce things that we build all the stuff, you guys are trying to enforce it, but at the same time you have the US versus Russia via Ukraine going on at the same time as well. You have Russia kind of partnering up with China and trying to get close to other allies, or this new set of allies that seems to be kind of becoming more and more important. So yeah, maybe this case has to be viewed in the context of all of those things happening. And so I guess we'll have to just see how that plays out. Legendary, any final points as we close the show today? Is that the right way to be looking at this? Any final thoughts?
I think it's the right way to look at it, and it's definitely a topic that we will revisit in the future, because it has the potential to have so many implications on different levels, but also to get other people to speak up. I don't know if you've seen this statement by Zuck speaking about Meta and how they've been pressured in COVID to handle content around COVID that was humorous and censored that, and how basically it seemed like that he's regretting some of the decisions that he made and giving in to that pressure. So it's definitely a topic that we'll come back to from different angles.
As you say, we do this every single day, Monday to Friday, 7 a.m. Eastern time for 1 hour. We're live on X, we're live on YouTube. We will deal with the crypto market, the NFT market, and anything that basically is important to us that's going on the internet. Like if there are things which are going to be challenging for us as it relates to freedom of expression, as it relates to how we go about our business, whether that's on Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, Telegram, any particular application, we will be covering it, because we know that for ourselves and for many of you in the audience, this is like absolutely crucial for us to be able to execute on our professional plans and kind of achieve our personal aspirations. So we hope that show is useful. Again, we'll be back again tomorrow. Thank you so much to my legendary co-host, Legendary. We'll see you again tomorrow. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a wonderful day. We will see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.